Jake Morrison wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag and looked at the broken hover bike in front of him. The engine had given up completely, and the owner wanted it fixed for half of what the parts would cost. This was his life now, fixing junk for people who could barely pay him enough to keep his small shop running. The garage sat in the worst part of New Detroit, where the air smelled like burning metal and failed dreams. Jake had been working here for 15 years, ever since he got out of the military. He was good at what he did. Really good. He could make anything fly, even if it looked like it should have been scrapped years ago. But being good at fixing things did not pay the bills. Jake was 38 years old and tired. His back hurt from bending over engines all day. His hands were permanently stained with oil and coolant. The landlord had been by 3 times this month asking for rent money. Jake had maybe 2 weeks before he would be thrown out onto the street. That was when she walked in. Jake heard the door open but did not look up right away. He was trying to figure out why the hover bike's power core kept shorting out. Then he heard footsteps that sounded different, heavier, more careful. When he finally looked up, his wrench fell out of his hand and clattered on the concrete floor. The woman standing in his doorway was 7 feet tall. Her skin looked like it was made of scales that changed color from green to gold as she moved. Her eyes were bright yellow and seemed to glow in the dim light of the garage. She wore expensive clothes that probably cost more than Jake made in a year. She was a dragon, not a real dragon like in old stories, but one of the draconic people who ruled most of the galaxy. Jake had seen them on the news sometimes, but never in person. They were supposed to be proud and smart and very dangerous. "Are you Jake Morrison?" she asked. Her voice was deep and smooth, like honey poured over steel. Jake nodded because he could not think of anything to say. "My name is Zara Drakemore. I have heard about your work. They say you can make anything fly." "I do my best," Jake managed to say. He picked up his wrench and tried to act normal, but his hands were shaking a little. "What kind of ship do you need fixed?" Zara smiled, showing teeth that were definitely sharper than human teeth. "I do not need anything fixed. I need something built, something new." Jake laughed, but not because anything was funny. "Lady, I fix hover bikes and old shuttles. I do not build spaceships. You want someone with a real shipyard and fancy equipment." "No," Zara said. "I want you. I have studied human engineering for many years. Your people do things differently than the rest of us. You find solutions that should not work, but they do. You make ships faster and stronger using parts that other species would throw away." She walked closer to Jake's workbench. Her footsteps made small clicking sounds on the concrete. "I need a ship that can travel faster than light, but not like the ships my people build or the ships humans usually make. I need something better." Jake set down his wrench and really looked at her. "Why me? There are human shipbuilders who know a lot more than I do." "Because they think too much like engineers," Zara said. "They follow rules and procedures. You think like a mechanic. You make things work even when they should not." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small device that projected numbers in the air. "I am prepared to pay you 5 million credits to build this ship." Jake stared at the numbers floating between them. 5 million credits was more money than he had ever seen. It was enough to pay his debts, buy a real workshop, and never worry about rent again. "There is one condition," Zara continued. "I have already purchased a location where you will work. An old garage outside the city. You will have everything you need there." "Why not here?" Jake asked. "Because what we are building must be kept secret. There are people who would not want us to succeed." Jake thought about it. He thought about his empty bank account and the landlord who wanted him gone. He thought about spending the rest of his life fixing other people's junk for barely enough money to survive. "When do we start?" he asked. 2 days later, Jake followed Zara's expensive car out of the city in his beat-up truck. They drove for an hour through empty land until they reached a large building that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The paint was peeling and weeds grew up through cracks in the parking area. "This is it?" Jake asked as they got out of their vehicles. "It has good bones," Zara said. "And it has space. Lots of space." She was right about that. The building was huge. Jake had never seen a garage this big outside of military bases. But it looked old and forgotten, like nobody had cared about it for a very long time. Zara opened the front door with a key that looked too new for such an old building. Inside, the garage was mostly empty except for some old workbenches and rusty equipment. But the roof was solid and the floor was level. It would work. "The previous owner was named Carl Hayes," Zara said as they walked around the space. He was an inventor. Disappeared about 50 years ago. No one knows what happened to him. Jake ran his hand along one of the walls. The concrete felt strange. Too smooth in some places, too rough in others. There were thin lines of metal running through it that did not look like normal reinforcement. Did this Hayes guy build spaceships? Jake asked. Some kind of experimental aircraft. Nothing that worked, according to the records. Jake nodded, but something felt odd about the place. It was too big for someone who just built failed experiments, and the way the walls were built suggested that someone had put a lot of thought and money into this garage. So what kind of ship are we building? Jake asked. Zara smiled her sharp-toothed smile. Something that has never been built before. Something that will change everything. As they talked about the project, Jake noticed that his voice echoed strangely in the building, like there was more space than what he could see. But he did not mention it. He had 5 million reasons to focus on the job ahead of him. Outside, the sun was setting over the empty land around the garage. Jake looked at the building one more time and wondered what he had gotten himself into. But it was too late to change his mind now. Jake had been working in the garage for 3 days, and something was definitely wrong with the place. Every time he moved one of the old workbenches, he heard hollow sounds from under the floor. When he dropped his wrench, it made an echo that lasted too long. The building felt bigger than it looked. Zara seemed to notice it too. She would stop talking sometimes and tilt her head like she was listening to something Jake could not hear. Her dragon senses were much better than human ones, and Jake could tell she was picking up things he was missing. On the third morning, Jake was trying to remove an old workbench that was bolted to the floor near the back wall. The thing was heavy and the bolts were rusted solid. He had been working on it for an hour with no luck. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. He picked up his biggest wrench and gave one of the bolts a hard hit. The wrench slipped and flew out of his hands. It sailed across the garage and hit the back wall with a loud clang. Jake expected to hear the tool hit the floor, but instead there was a different sound, a clicking sound like something mechanical engaging. A section of the wall about 6 feet wide slid sideways with a quiet hum. Behind it was a staircase leading down into darkness. Jake and Zara stared at the opening for a long moment. "Well," Zara said finally, "that explains the echoes." Jake picked up a flashlight and walked to the opening. The stairs were made of metal and looked much newer than the garage above. They went down at least 20 feet before disappearing into the dark. "Should we go down there?" Jake asked. Zara's yellow eyes seemed to glow brighter as she looked into the opening. "There is technology down there. I can sense it. Lots of it." They went down the stairs together, their footsteps ringing on the metal. At the bottom, Jake found a light switch. When he flipped it, rows of bright lights came on, revealing something that made both of them stop and stare. The underground room was enormous. It was at least as big as the garage above, maybe bigger. The walls were lined with computer screens and control panels. Workbenches covered with strange tools filled the center of the space. And everywhere, covering every available surface, were blueprints and technical drawings. But what really got their attention was at the far end of the room. Behind a wall of thick glass was another chamber, and in that chamber sat a spaceship. It was not like any ship Jake had ever seen. It was sleek and smooth with curves that seemed to flow like water. The hull was dark metal that seemed to absorb light. It looked fast even sitting still. "Carl Hayes," Zara said quietly. "He was not just an inventor. He was a genius." Jake walked over to the nearest workbench and looked at the blueprints spread across it. Even though he was just a mechanic, he could tell these designs were way ahead of anything being built today. The propulsion systems looked completely different from normal rocket engines. The power systems used principles he had never seen before. "Look at this," Zara said from across the room. She was standing in front of a large computer screen that had turned on when she approached it. "These are test results. This ship was designed to travel faster than light without using normal FTL drives." Jake joined her at the computer. The screen showed complex mathematical equations and test data that hurt his head to look at. But some of the simpler diagrams made sense to him. The ship seemed to work by bending space around itself instead of pushing through it. "If this works," Jake said, "it would be faster than anything in the galaxy." "And more efficient," Zara added. "Look at these power consumption numbers. This ship could travel between star systems using less energy than my people use to power a city." They spent the next hour exploring the underground laboratory. There were rooms full of prototype engines, chambers for testing new materials, and enough computing power to run a small planet. Carl Hayes had built himself a research facility that any government would have been proud to own. But the most interesting discovery was a series of personal logs that Hayes had recorded before he disappeared. Jake and Zara sat in front of the main computer and listened to the dead inventor explain his work. The problem with current faster-than-light travel, Hayes said in one recording, is that it tears holes in space. These holes let things through, things that should stay where they are. The screen showed diagrams of something Hayes called void watchers. According to his research, they were creatures that lived in the empty spaces between stars. Normal FTL drives created disturbances that attracted their attention, and their attention was never good. Every time a ship uses FTL, Hayes continued, it sends out signals that these things can follow. They have been watching us, studying us, learning about us, and I think they are planning something. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying there are monsters living in space? Zara was studying the data more carefully. According to this, they are not monsters. They are just different. Very different. But Hayes believed they saw all biological life as a threat to be eliminated. The final log entry was dated just days before Hayes disappeared. In it, he sounded scared and desperate. They know what I am building, he said. They have found me somehow. I can feel them watching. I have to hide the research before they come. If anyone finds this place, please finish what I started. The ship in the testing chamber is almost complete. It just needs someone to install the final systems and test the drive. The recording ended with Hayes looking directly into the camera. Remember, this technology cannot fall into the wrong hands. It has to be shared with everyone or it will be used to control everyone. Jake turned off the computer and looked at Zara. So what do we do now? Zara was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ship behind the glass wall. We finish what he started, but carefully. If Hayes was right about the Void Watchers, then we need to be very careful about who finds out what we are doing. And if he was wrong, then we just built the fastest ship in the galaxy and changed the balance of power for every species in known space. Jake laughed, but it sounded nervous even to him. No pressure at all. They spent the rest of the day going through Hayes's research, trying to understand how close he had come to finishing the ship. The good news was that most of the hard work was done. The bad news was that the final steps required skills and knowledge that neither Jake nor Zara possessed. But as Jake studied the blueprints, he began to see places where his mechanical experience might help. Hayes had been thinking like a scientist, trying to build everything perfectly. Jake could see ways to simplify some of the systems, to make them more reliable and easier to maintain. I think we can do this, he told Zara as they prepared to leave the underground lab. It will not be easy, but I think we can make this thing fly. Zara nodded, but her expression was troubled. The question is whether we can do it before someone else finds out what we have discovered. As they climbed the stairs back to the garage, Jake wondered what they had gotten themselves into. Building a revolutionary spaceship was one thing. Doing it while hiding from ancient space monsters was something else entirely. Jake and Zara had been working on Hayes's ship for 2 weeks when the first visitor arrived. Jake was under the ship installing new power cables when he heard unfamiliar voices upstairs in the garage. He crawled out and listened carefully. "We know she is here," someone was saying. The voice had the same deep quality as Zara's, which meant it belonged to another dragon person. "The consortium demands that she return home immediately." Jake heard Zara respond in her own language, which sounded like a mix of growling and singing. Whatever she said, the other dragon did not like it. Their voice got louder and angrier. Jake climbed the stairs quietly and peered through the crack in the hidden door. 3 dragons in fancy uniforms stood near the main entrance. They were all bigger than Zara, with darker scales and cold expressions. "Military types," Jake guessed. "You were sent to study human technology," the leader said, switching back to English, "not to work with them on secret projects. The consortium has been patient, but your behavior is becoming embarrassing." "My research is not complete," Zara replied. Her voice was calm, but Jake could hear the tension underneath. "I need more time." "Time for what?" "To help these primitives build toys that will never work?" The leader gestured dismissively. "Come home, Zara. Your family is worried about you." Jake knew that was not the real reason they were here. Dragons did not travel across the galaxy because they were worried about someone. They came because they wanted something. "I will return when my work is finished," Zara said firmly. The leader stepped closer to her. That was not a request. Jake was getting ready to go help Zara when he heard the sound of human vehicles approaching. Through the dirty windows, he could see military trucks pulling up outside. Soldiers in Earth Defense Force uniforms poured out and surrounded the building. Now there were two different groups of armed people outside, and Jake and Zara were trapped in the middle. "This is Colonel Ryan Brooks of the Earth Defense Force," a voice announced through a speaker. "This facility is under investigation for illegal weapons research. Everyone inside needs to come out with their hands visible." The dragons looked at each other with expressions that might have been amusement. "It seems your human friends have found you as well," the leader told Zara. Jake watched through the window as the human soldiers set up their equipment. They had scanners and sensors that could probably detect the underground laboratory. It was only a matter of time before they found the hidden entrance. "What do we do?" Jake whispered when Zara came down to the lab. "We have a problem," she said. "Both sides know we are working on something important. Neither side is going to let us continue." "How did they find out?" Zara looked uncomfortable. "I may have been asking too many questions about human engineering techniques. My people became suspicious, and your government has been monitoring all dragon activity on Earth since the trade disputes began." Jake felt like an idiot. Of course, people would notice when a dragon started working with a human mechanic in a secret location. They might as well have put up a sign advertising what they were doing. "Can we finish the ship before they break in here?" Jake asked. Zara checked the computer systems that monitored their progress. "The main drive is installed, but we still need to complete the navigation systems and run the final tests. That will take at least another week." "We do not have a week." Outside, Jake could hear the dragons and humans starting to argue with each other. Both groups wanted to control whatever was in the garage, but neither group wanted to fight the other. Yet. "There is something else," Zara said quietly. "I have been detecting strange energy readings for the past few days. Very faint, but getting stronger." "What kind of energy?" "The kind that Hayes was worried about. I think our work here has attracted attention from things that are much more dangerous than soldiers or consortium enforcers." Jake felt his stomach drop. The Void Watchers. Hayes had warned that building FTL technology would attract them, but Jake had hoped the old inventor was just being paranoid. "How long before they get here?" Jake asked. "I do not know. Maybe days, maybe hours. Their energy patterns are unlike anything in our databases." The sound of drilling came from upstairs. Someone was trying to get through the reinforced door of the garage. Jake estimated they had maybe an hour before the soldiers broke through. "We need to make a choice," Zara said. "We can surrender to one of the groups outside and hope they let us continue working. Or we can try to finish the ship and escape before anyone can stop us." Jake looked at the ship sitting in its testing chamber. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Hayes had designed it to change everything, to give every species in the galaxy access to clean, safe, faster-than-light travel. But it would only matter if they could complete it and get the information out to people who could use it. "How much of the ship actually works right now?" Jake asked. "The propulsion system is complete. The life support works. The basic navigation should function, but it has not been tested." "Good enough," Jake said. "We are going to run." "Where?" "If we take off in an untested ship, we could end up anywhere. Or nowhere." Jake grinned at her. "Lady, I have been flying ships that should not work my entire life. Trust me on this one." They spent the next 30 minutes preparing the ship for emergency launch. Jake bypassed several safety systems and jury-rigged solutions for components that were not quite finished. It was not pretty, but it would work. The drilling sounds from upstairs got louder. Jake could hear voices arguing in multiple languages as the different groups tried to decide who would go into the garage first. "Are you ready?" Zara asked as they climbed into the ship's cockpit. Jake looked at the controls, which were a mix of Hayes' advanced technology and his own improvised additions. Half the warning lights were flashing and most of the systems were showing errors. Under normal circumstances, he would never try to fly something in this condition. But these were not normal circumstances. "Let us go make some history," Jake said, and pressed the launch button. The ship rose smoothly from its testing chamber as the roof above them opened like the petals of a mechanical flower. Jake had just enough time to see the shocked faces of soldiers and dragons staring up at them before the ship shot into the sky. Behind them, Jake could see strange shadows moving at the edge of his vision. Things that did not belong in normal space were starting to take notice of what they had built. "Where are we going?" Zara asked as the ship climbed toward orbit. "Somewhere we can finish this properly," Jake said, And somewhere we can make sure Hayes's technology gets to the people who need it most. The ship broke through Earth's atmosphere and entered the darkness of space. For the first time in weeks, Jake felt like they might actually succeed. Then the proximity alarm started going off, and Jake realized their real problems were just beginning. Jake stared at the proximity alarms flashing red across the ship's control panel. According to the sensors, they were surrounded by objects that should not exist. The readings showed massive shapes moving through space, but when Jake looked out the windows, he saw nothing but stars. "What exactly are we looking at?" Jake asked Zara. Zara was studying her own set of instruments, her scaled fingers dancing across controls that Hayes had designed for non-human hands. "The sensors are detecting gravitational distortions, large ones, but there is nothing visible creating them. Could it be the Void Watchers Hayes warned about? Maybe. Or maybe our ship's new drive system is creating effects we do not understand yet." Jake decided to focus on things he could control. The ship was flying smoothly, which was more than he had expected given how quickly they had to launch. Most of the systems were working, and the ones that were not could be fixed with time and the right parts. "We need somewhere safe to complete the work," Jake said. "Somewhere nobody will think to look for us." Zara pulled up a star chart on her screen. "There is an abandoned mining station in the asteroid belt. It was shut down 10 years ago when the ore ran out. We could hide there and finish the ship properly. How long to get there with normal engines?" 3 days. Jake looked at the FTL drive controls that Hayes had designed. According to the documentation, the drive could make the trip in minutes instead of days, but it had never been tested, and Hayes had warned that using FTL technology attracted unwanted attention. "The drive is not ready for testing," Zara said, reading his thoughts. "Too many systems are still incomplete, but the basic function should work, right? Even if it is not perfect?" Zara checked the engineering displays. "Theoretically, yes. But Hayes designed this system to be much more complex than normal FTL drives. If something goes wrong, we could end up scattered across several star systems." Jake had made risky decisions his entire life, flying broken ships, taking jobs he was not qualified for, trusting a dragon woman who wanted to build an impossible spaceship. This was just one more risk in a long line of them. "I'm going to test the drive," Jake announced. "Jake, no. We should wait until we can run proper diagnostics. We do not have time for proper anything. Those ships that were chasing us will catch up soon, and I am getting readings that suggest something much worse is tracking us." Jake was right about that. The gravitational distortions were getting stronger, and the ship's computers were detecting energy patterns that did not match anything in their databases. Whatever the Void Watchers were, they were definitely paying attention now. "Fine," Zara said, "but we start with a very short jump. Just a few thousand kilometers to test the basic systems." Jake programmed the jump coordinates into the navigation system. Hayes had designed the interface to be intuitive, but there were still dozens of variables to consider. Power levels, field geometry, temporal displacement factors. Jake understood maybe half of what he was doing. "Ready?" he asked. Zara strapped herself into her seat and checked her instruments one more time. "As ready as we can be for something this insane." Jake pressed the activation sequence. The universe changed. Instead of the violent shaking and bright lights that normal FTL drives produced, Hayes' system created something completely different. Reality seemed to fold around the ship like fabric being gathered by invisible hands. The stars outside shifted and blurred, but not in the usual way. It was like looking through water that was perfectly clear but constantly moving. The jump lasted only a few seconds, but Jake felt like he had experienced something profound. The ship had not moved through space so much as convinced space to bring their destination closer to them. "How did that feel to you?" Zara asked when normal space returned. "Like flying through a dream," Jake said. "Did it work?" Zara checked their position. "We moved exactly where we intended to go. And look at this." She showed him the power consumption readings. "We used about 1% of the energy a normal FTL drive would need for the same distance." Jake grinned. Hayes really did build something amazing. The question is whether we can control it well enough to make longer jumps. They spent the next hour testing the drive with increasingly longer jumps. Each time the system worked perfectly. The ship moved through space like it was dancing instead of fighting against the laws of physics. Jake had never experienced anything like it. But the strangest part was what happened to the Void Watchers during the jumps. The gravitational distortions that had been tracking them completely disappeared, Whenever the drive was active, it was like the ship became invisible to whatever was hunting them. Hayes was right, Zara said as they completed their final test jump. This drive does not create the disturbances that attract unwanted attention. If anything, it seems to hide us from detection, so we can travel anywhere without being followed? It appears so. But I am detecting something else now. Energy signatures from the direction of Earth. Multiple ships heading this way at high speed. Jake checked the long-range sensors. At least a dozen ships were coming after them. Some showed the energy patterns of human military vessels. Others matched the signatures of Draconic Consortium warships. They really want us back, Jake observed. They want the technology. Both sides know that whoever controls Hayes' drive system will have a massive advantage over everyone else. Jake thought about what Hayes had said in his final recording. The technology could not be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. It had to be shared with everyone, or it would be used to control everyone. We need to finish the ship and then make sure this technology gets out to people who will use it responsibly, Jake said. How do we do that when half the galaxy is trying to capture us? Jake looked at the star chart showing their possible destinations. There were hundreds of worlds out there, many of them home to species that had never had access to advanced faster-than-light travel. With Hayes' technology, those worlds could join the galactic community as equals instead of subjects. We become ghosts, Jake said. We finish this ship, then we start visiting every world that needs this technology. We give them the plans, help them build their own ships, and make sure no single government can control faster-than-light travel. Zara stared at him. That would take years, maybe decades, and we would be fugitives the entire time. You got a better idea? Zara was quiet for a long moment, thinking about what Jake was proposing. It would mean giving up her life in the Draconic Consortium. It would mean spending the rest of her days running from authorities and living on the edges of civilization. But it would also mean changing the galaxy forever. The mining station, she said finally. We go there, finish the ship properly, and then we start our new career as technological revolutionaries. Jake programmed the coordinates for their next jump. Behind them, the pursuing fleet was getting closer. But with Hayes' drive, they could stay ahead of anyone who tried to follow them. Ready for another jump? Jake asked. Ready, Zara replied. The ship folded space around itself once again, and they disappeared into the darkness between the stars, carrying with them the key to changing everything. The abandoned mining station hung in the asteroid belt like a metal skeleton against the stars. Jake guided their ship into the main docking bay, which was large enough to hide them from any scanning ships that might pass by. The station still had power and life support, which meant they could work on finishing the ship without worrying about running out of air. This place gives me the creeps, Jake said as they explored the empty corridors. Their footsteps echoed in the silence and dust floated in the artificial gravity like tiny ghosts. It is perfect for our needs, Zara replied practically. No one will think to look for us here, and we have access to tools and materials from the mining equipment. They spent the next 2 weeks completing Hayes' ship. Jake worked on the mechanical systems while Zara handled the more complex computer programming. It was the best partnership Jake had ever experienced. Zara's logical dragon mind complemented his intuitive human approach perfectly. The ship they created was better than anything Hayes had originally designed. Jake's practical modifications made it more reliable and easier to maintain. Zara's programming improvements made the navigation system faster and more accurate. Together, they had built something that combined the best of both their species' engineering traditions. We need a name for her, Jake said as they stood in the docking bay looking at their completed ship. Hayes called it the Phoenix in his notes, Zara said. A bird that rises from ashes to begin a new life. Phoenix it is. They tested every system twice before declaring the ship ready for its real mission. The FTL drive worked flawlessly, moving them across vast distances without creating any of the disturbances that normal drives produced. The ship was fast, quiet, and nearly impossible to track. Their first stop was a small world called Kepler Station, home to a species of peaceful traders who had been trying to develop their own FTL technology for decades. Jake and Zara arrived unannounced and offered to share Hayes' research with their scientists. Why would you give this to us? Asked Dr. Lynn Walsh, the head of Kepler Station's research department. This technology is worth more than our entire planetary economy. Because it should belong to everyone, Zara explained. not just the species that are already powerful. They spent 3 days teaching the Kepler scientists how to build their own version of Hayes's drive. Jake showed them how to adapt the design using materials they could obtain locally. Zara helped them understand the mathematical principles that made the system work. When they left Kepler Station, the scientists were already building their first prototype ship. Their next stop was the Centauri Collective, a group of human colonies that had been cut off from Earth by political disputes. The colonists were struggling to maintain contact between their scattered worlds using old, inefficient ships. "You are giving us independence," said Captain Roy Davis of the Collective's tiny space fleet. "With this technology, we will not need to depend on Earth for transportation." "That is the idea," Jake said. Over the following months, Jake and Zara visited dozens of worlds. They shared Hayes's technology with anyone who promised to use it peacefully. They helped struggling colonies build better ships. They taught isolated species how to join the galactic community as equals. But they were not the only ones spreading the technology. The scientists they had taught were sharing it with their neighbors. The ships they had helped build were carrying the knowledge to even more distant worlds. Hayes's revolutionary FTL drive was spreading across the galaxy like seeds on the wind. The established powers were not happy about this development. "There is a price on our heads now," Zara informed Jake as they hit in orbit around a gas giant. "The Galactic Council has declared us enemies of civilization. Both the Draconic Consortium and Earth's government have offered massive rewards for our capture." Jake checked the news feeds on his personal communicator. Their faces were on wanted posters across a dozen different languages. The authorities were calling them everything from pirates to terrorists to dangerous revolutionaries. "How do you feel about being an outlaw?" Jake asked. "Better than I expected," Zara admitted. "For the first time in my life, I am doing something that matters. Something that will outlast me." 3 years after they had first met in Jake's garage, the galaxy was a very different place. Hundreds of worlds now had access to clean, efficient, faster-than-light travel. Trade routes that had been controlled by powerful governments were now open to anyone with a ship. Species that had been isolated for centuries were suddenly part of a larger community. The old power structures were crumbling, but new alliances were forming. The species that Jake and Zara had helped were working together, sharing resources and knowledge. They called themselves the Free Navigation Alliance, and they were growing stronger every day. "We need to think about the future," Zara said as they sat in the Phoenix's cockpit, watching the stars. "We have been running for 3 years. Maybe it is time to find a more permanent base." Jake had been thinking the same thing. They had accomplished more than he had ever dreamed possible. But the constant traveling was exhausting. And there was still so much work to do. "I know a place," Jake said. "A world at the edge of known space. Good resources, friendly people, and far enough from the major powers that they leave it alone." The world was called Haven, and it was perfect for their needs. The local government welcomed them as heroes and offered them land to build a proper research facility. Jake and Zara established the Hayes Institute, named after the inventor whose work had made everything possible. The institute became a beacon for scientists and engineers from across the galaxy. Species that had never worked together before came to Haven to learn and share knowledge. The institute's workshops produced new ships, better engines, and innovations that no single species could have developed alone. Jake found himself teaching classes to young engineers who came from hundreds of different worlds. He showed them how to think like mechanics instead of just following blueprints. How to find simple solutions to complex problems. How to make things work even when they should not. Zara became the Institute's chief researcher, leading projects that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. But she also spent time teaching others how to combine logical thinking with creative problem solving. How to respect both tradition and innovation. Years passed. Jake's hair turned gray, and his hands showed the scars of a lifetime spent working with machines. But he was happier than he had ever been. Every day brought new challenges and new discoveries. Zara, whose dragon lifespan meant she was still in her prime, took over more of the Institute's daily operations as Jake gradually reduced his workload. But they remained partners in everything that mattered. "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked one evening as they watched the sunset from the Institute's observation deck. "Giving up your old life for all this?" Jake thought about his cramped garage in New Detroit, his empty bank account, his daily struggle just to survive. Then he looked at the ships taking off from Haven's spaceport, carrying Hayes's technology to new worlds. He thought about all the species that now had the freedom to explore the galaxy as equals. Not for a second, he said. The Phoenix sat in its hangar below them, ready for their next mission. There were still worlds that needed their help. Still governments that tried to control faster-than-light travel. Still young engineers who needed to learn that the impossible was just another word for untried. Jake Morrison had started as a mechanic fixing broken hoverbikes in the worst part of the city. Now he was helping to reshape the galaxy. It was not the life he had planned, but it was exactly the life he was meant to live. And somewhere in the space between the stars, Carl Hayes's legacy continued to spread, carrying hope and freedom to every corner of the universe.